Hey survivors, how are you? Happy Tuesday. Um, Glad to be with you this evening. So, we are back with another healing conversation, and this is a really good conversation this evening. Our focus is still on this year, Black trauma, and we're going to have a conversation about grief and loss. And I'm going to bring back our special guest. I say back because she was with us in December, and today we're going to focus on a different topic. So, welcome, welcome. Glad to be back with you. So, I'm going to see if I can get her in the room. So, give me a sec. Okay, I think she's coming on.
Hey,
Hey,
can you hear me?
I can.
Oh, okay,
Hey,
good.
hey.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. Give me one second. Let me see if I can raise my volume.
Yeah, me
Okay.
too. Okay. Good to
All
see you
right.
again.
Good to see you again. I'm just trying to fix myself here. Can you hear me well?
Perfect, perfect, perfect. I can hear you.
Okay, great. Welcome back.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I feel so
Absolutely.
honored.
Um, so I was just bringing everybody up to date in regards to just being back and having another healing conversation. And the continued focus that we have on this year, Black trauma. And I think it's so important that we talk about the things that have impacted the Black community. So thank you for returning and agreeing to do this. I know last time that we were together, you spoke about your
Yeah.
book, right? But this time I wanted to focus on something that was actually included in the book that we did not really talk too much about, and that you were so brave to share actually in your book, right? So just start off by reintroducing yourself to those who may not have seen the last live that we did together in December, and sharing a little bit about your book, share a little bit about how people can follow you, right? And just kind of be a part of what you're doing. And then we want to do that at the end too, because we always
Right.
try to do it at the end, right?
Mhm.
But just share a little bit about yourself and your book and how people can stay connected to you.
Sure, no problem. Hello, everyone. My name is Kimberly Rodney. I am a wife, a mom, a new author of, actually have my book with me now, right here,
Yay! Awesome
Discovering God,
book, awesome book.
Discovering God in You, A Young Woman's Guide to Identity, Loss, no, Identity, Worth, Purpose, and Freedom. I wanted to share my journey with people, wanted to share my journey with especially young women, because I found that in my 20s, I struggled a lot. And I'm hoping that this book can be a vessel for others so that they can find healing, find a relationship with God, and just learn how to be vulnerable, because I think a lot of times we are afraid to be vulnerable. And I feel like this book was like opening part of my heart, to the
Yeah.
world. So how you can find me, I'm available on Instagram, Kimberly J. Rodney. I also have a website, and I'm going to type it in towards the end because I
Mhm.
want to make sure I've typed the correct website.
Okay, so I'm going to remind you of that, right?
Yeah, sure.
We'll remind each other because
Mhm.
sometimes we get lost in the conversation when the conversation gets really good,
Yeah.
right? So sometimes we can't forget, and so I'm gonna write myself a mental note. I
Okay.
always like to have like a notepad in front of me,
Mhm.
particularly when I'm having these kind of conversations, because there are things that you may say that I want to ask more about, right? So I always try to have one of these pads in front of me. So I
Mhm.
definitely have one tonight. And we're really going to focus on grief and loss this evening. So um, we know that as we continue to come out of the pandemic, a lot of us have experienced a lot of loss, right? Loss of loved ones. And we know that the pandemic was a traumatic event for everyone. And there were times that because of the pandemic and the impact that it had on our community, that we were not able to say goodbye, right? We were not able to have a funeral. And that is our way of usually saying goodbye to our loved one. And we couldn't do any of those things. We had to drop them off at the hospital and leave them there, and we could not join them. So being that we are like slowly healing from that, right? I can't say that we are definitely beyond that. We're slow. I think we're slowly healing from that. But then there's also a lot of effects. I think there's like lasting effects because of it. And so I wanted to talk about this because I know that the pandemic was not just a time of grief and loss, that was our first time experiencing. I should just say that, right? So we've had a lot of other grief and losses in our life, right? It may be different for different people, but I wanted to talk more about that because I kind of feel, and you guys are welcome to jump in and write a comment, share your thoughts, ask questions, whatever you feel like that you need to do to contribute to this conversation. I feel like within the Black community that we tend to minimize any form of trauma, right? Because we are taught as a community, as Black people, that we are strong, we are resilient, right? And that is definitely true. I will not, I will not minimize that, but just because you're strong and resilient doesn't mean that you can't seek support, that you don't need help. And I think that's one of the things that we need to learn and are slowly beginning to learn to do as a community. So I wanted to talk about grief and loss because I feel like it's one of um, the major impacts within the Black community. And like I said, we tend to minimize the impact of how experienced the loss of a loved one has on us. Right. So with that being said, I want to start out in your book, right? In the beginning of your book, you talk about the loss of your dad, right? So can you just share a little bit about that, and why did you feel that you needed to put that in your book and the importance of it?
Okay, so I'm just gonna say this is a very sensitive subject for me. My biological dad, passed away when I was 5 years old, and I felt like when I started the first chapter, it said loss, how the journey began. I felt that putting this in the beginning of the book will allow my readers to see who I was from the beginning, from that little girl, because I believe that little girl and little boy always follows us. So I wanted people to see how that little girl was at that time in her life. And I wanted to talk about my dad because I felt like it was honoring him in a way, honoring his memory, even though I don't have much memories of him at that age, but I can remember significant things, just like him picking me up from school, him taking me to Lincoln Park in Brooklyn to ride my bike. I remember vividly the funeral, and those are significant. And, I wanted my readers to see that, as a child, when we go through loss, we need support. And sometimes the adults in our lives are dealing with their own grief and they don't know how to communicate that with a child. Sometimes in our community, don't say anything to them, shun away from it, don't be honest. And, being that I've worked in hospice for the past 14 years, I've seen it for myself. And one thing I would tell families is to be honest with your child, because they're going to remember those things. That's a significant person in their lives. So it's good to have that constant communication on their level, of course, in order for them to process it. It's important. And I feel I didn't really have that because I'm not placing blame on my parents or on me or my mom or my other part of my life. I didn't have that. So as I grew up, that loss was always there. Even though I grew up in a two-parent household, I had my bonus dad, I would say, my
Mhm.
stepfather. He was there. He was consistently there throughout my life up until today. But that
Mhm.
biological loss was
Mhm.
really difficult for me. And I felt like putting it at the beginning, I wanted to give people like a content, going through the
Mhm.
book. Because, I struggled with who I was, my identity, my worth, my purpose. Um, not placing full blame on that loss, but I think it had an impact, definitely a big impact on my life.
Yeah, you said
I
a
don't know
whole
if I
bunch.
answered the
Like,
question, but
yes, you did. You answered the question and then some. And some I'm going to like really ask more about later on. What I want to say is one of the things that you started to say as you were explaining everything was that it's a very, very sensitive topic. And thank you for saying that because it reminded us that even as we are having this conversation, if you need to pause, right,
mm-hmm.
and take care of yourself, I
Right.
think self-care is so
Mm-hmm.
important. And not just you, Kimberly, but anybody else
Right.
who is like tuning into this live, right? So just taking the time to know when you need a break, know when you need to like, okay, just give me a few minutes. All those things are so important. So I thank you, number one, for your vulnerability, for your vulnerability to your readers, right? I'm a true believer in transparency,
Yeah.
right? Um, and just even agreeing again to have this conversation. Um, you shared so many jewels just right then and there. Like it's now I'm like kind of like, okay, so what do I want to get, what do I want to get into next? And you one of the things that you said is that to be honest, because you work in hospice care, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you are around families who are grieving or about to grieve the
Mm-hmm.
loss of their loved one, right? Um, One of the things that you mentioned was being honest with your child and letting, being clear about what's going
Mm-hmm.
on, but in the way that they can understand.
Right.
And I think it's so important that as adults that we're able to do that. And the language that we use is so
Mm-hmm.
important. We have children, because I work with
Mm-hmm.
children a lot, there are things that parents tell their children about the loss of their mom or their dad or whomever that significant person is in their life, and it's important the words that
Yeah.
we use. We for example, the well, daddy or mommy is sleeping,
Right.
right? So even though that's like we're trying to like comfort the child and be
Yeah.
very delicate as far as how we explain to them, we're kind of doing the child a disservice. And I wasn't
Yeah.
going to jump into this now, but you look, that's fine. I don't have no issue with that, right? Um, because one day they're going to think that, well, if mom or dad is sleeping, then why won't
Wake
they wake up,
up.
right? So
Mm-hmm.
this being really clear about when we talk about death, right, and being using concrete
That's the
words and
words.
words that
Mm-hmm.
they do understand. That is so important as we are communicating to our children, to our young people,
Mm-hmm.
and being honest about it in the, like you said, in the words that they understand. So when we use words like sleeping or went away or all of those things are not concrete things.
Right.
Um, that is just something that children might say, okay, well, how come they haven't woken
Yeah.
up, right? So I think it's important that we are careful with the words that we use. Um, the other thing that you mentioned was a lot of times adults are grieving themselves,
Right.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And even in a situation with your mom, right, that she was probably going through her own grief process, which is normal
Yeah.
depending, based on the situation. And a lot of times we encounter people who are going through their own grief process
Mm-hmm.
and they may not be aware that, hey, oh, hey, listen, that I'm grieving, then my child is grieving also, right? And it's not that that they don't want to be there for you, right? But they are grieving
Right.
themselves. And this is why that therapy is so
Definitely.
important, right? And we're going to talk a little bit about that later on. Um, in the loss of your dad, what how do you think that his loss impacted you? You shared a lot of memories, right, that you had, even though you were 5. There's things that you remember, like you
Hmm.
said, and picking you up from school.
Hmm.
So how do you think even losing your dad at such a young age, um, how do you think that impacted you?
Uh, I was thinking about this question in particular when you sent it. The word that came in my mind was abandonment.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Even though it wasn't on purpose that he passed away, but you have that sense of abandonment, like, okay, he's not there no more. And so now I have my mom, this is when he first passed away. I have my mom. I was like ridden with like anxiety because I'm like, something's going to happen to my mom now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. There is definitely a feeling of abandonment, and um, even at the young age of 5, it's we don't think like a young adult,
Right.
right? Like, okay, well, daddy didn't purposely leave me, right? But it's just that we feel like that person is no longer there, and why did they leave me? So there's definitely a sense of abandonment.
Yeah.
Um, any other any other thoughts come to mind
So
for
you
you?
said that, how did it impact me going through my life?
Mm-hmm.
Again, I said that it was always like a hole in your heart. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and so sometimes with having a hole in something, you want to fill it with something. So, as a teenager, I was an introvert. I didn't have a lot of friends. So getting outside of my self was very hard. I was have a hard time trusting people. And so like if friends left me, I felt abandoned. Um, Growing up in my adult life and relationships, I may have held on to certain relationships because I was afraid to lose that person
Mm-hmm.
because I didn't want to feel abandoned. So
Mm-hmm.
it's a circle. It all connects. The pieces connect, and I didn't really realize certain things or certain choices I was making because wait, maybe that's why I do this, or maybe that's why I do that. Maybe that's why I deal with this person the way I do, or so it does bring up a lot of issues. And I think me going to therapy, well, the first time I went to therapy, because I went to therapy a few times, off and on, I
Mm-hmm.
really realized like it allows you to have a space where you can discuss your loss or your childhood. And as an adult, we sometimes make choices because of our past. So I wanted to
Sometimes.
get out. I wanted to get out of certain patterns, and I'm like, oh, that's why. That's why it's so important. As a child, as even as an adult, me being in
Yes.
my 40s, you need that space where you can have an opportunity to talk about your issues.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think so many times we're walking around acting like we have everything together and we don't.
Mm-hmm.
You know, um, I still don't.
Mm-hmm.
Until now, I'm getting better. I'm trying to be more vocal about certain things. That's why I wanted to share my story in my book, because it's all a part of
Mm-hmm.
healing conversations. The more we talk about a thing, the more we can face it.
Mm-hmm.
When we don't talk about it, we hold it inside, and we may, take our frustrations out on people, or walk around being angry, and, you know, depression sets in, all these things, if we
Mm-hmm.
don't talk about
Mm-hmm.
certain things.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes talking about it is hurtful. We don't want people to see that part of us. But how can we even have relationships if we're not willing to be transparent, or we're willing to be vulnerable?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Mhm.
So again, you said so much.
Sorry, y'all.
Um, thank you
That's why I got
for
my tissue right here, because I was like, I know I'm gonna cry.
um, thank you for even having started a conversation about therapy because I think it's so important. Um, and I think what we don't what we don't recognize that grief when we lose a loved one,
Mhm.
that is a trauma for us, right?
Definitely
Um,
trauma.
that's definitely trauma. And what happens when trauma goes unaddressed, right? It is just starts to negatively impact certain areas of your life.
Mhm.
And for you, as you said, there was a feeling of abandonment, and then that abandonment spilled over in how you interacted with others,
Mhm.
holding on to them because I'm afraid that they're going to leave me. Every time somebody left me or exited my life, I felt abandoned all
Mhm.
over again. And so it's like it almost can be like a cycle
Yeah.
over and over, particularly when you don't recognize
Yeah.
it. So with that, when did you said there was like a hole in a void, right?
Mhm.
When did you realize that the void was because of the loss of your dad?
Again, I think I really realized it when I felt like I was seeking something bigger than myself.
Mm-hmm.
Um, when I went to therapy, when I really started to um, connect more with my faith and my relationship with God. Because through all this loss and trauma that and you know what? So I never really looked at it. You say loss, we say grief, but I never really looked at it as trauma. But now that you kind of brought it to the forefront, it was. You know, to have a person
Absolutely.
in your life one day and not have them the next is
Mm-hmm.
traumatic. And we
Mm-hmm.
don't look at it that way. We,
No,
oh,
we
if a
don't.
person died, we don't, and,
Yeah.
thank you for bringing that to my attention. I'm
Mm-hmm.
like, oh, wow. It was a traumatic time.
Mm-hmm.
And we carry that trauma. And so I needed something to hold on to. I was like, at one point I'm like, God, I feel, I feel lost. I need something. I need you to help me through this,
Yeah.
because we are all going to face loss, no matter
Yeah.
how much times we think that we're going to live to 120.
Mm-hmm.
There are people out there, but it's rare.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think working in the field that I'm working in, I see it every single day. And I'm like, okay, we're going to face it. But it's scary at the same time when we think about ourselves, when we think about our family. How are we
Mm-hmm.
going to deal with it? And I feel like the only way I personally can deal with those things, or have dealt with in my adult life as I got older, is because of my relationship with God.
Mm-hmm.
And so it all connects. Maybe if I didn't have a relationship with him, I would probably wouldn't be here. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
But I also, driving home today, I said, well, if my dad didn't die, then I wouldn't have him in my book. I wouldn't have those things to talk about in this
Yeah.
book,
Yeah.
looking for identity, purpose, and worth. I wouldn't have those struggles that I had. It
Mm-hmm.
wouldn't be in this book. So, we could look at things one way, but then also we have to kind of switch our perspective. But I think with switching our perspective, it takes takes you being in a space of maturity.
And
I think as I
healing.
mature,
And,
yeah, and
and
healing.
healing. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, and I'm still on that journey.
Yeah.
We're never going to forget about who passed away. We're not, especially when they hold a significant place in our lives, we're not going to forget about it.
Mm-hmm.
How are we going to deal with it? Are we just
Mm-hmm.
going to, oh, okay, they're gone, let's move on? No, there's families and cultures that have rituals where they memorialize them,
Mm-hmm.
you know? And I never did that for my dad, but I'm like, I need to do that more often. I do speak about him with my son, here and there. I did bring him to the gravesite a couple of years ago just to honor him, because I still want to honor him, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Was that the-
Absolutely. Thank you. Yep. You good. You good. No worries. You're good. Um, I just wanna I just wanna touch on a couple of things. You said looking at it from like switching your perspective. So
Mhm.
because you are on this journey of healing, right? You're able to now not just look at the loss and how it impacted you, but look at what how you have grown,
Mm.
right? And even processing and being able to deal with the loss. You're able to see the positive things in your
Mhm.
life, and that is a sign of healing,
Yeah.
right? Um, so I'm just gonna touch a little bit on, like, I know when I was um, writing my book, The Journey Continues, and because my book is focused on abuse,
Mhm.
right? It's another form of trauma,
Trauma.
right? Still
Yeah.
trauma. It's
Yeah.
just a different type of trauma,
Yeah.
right? Um, there were times when I was writing, even the book that I have that's coming, there were times that I was writing about my story and I had to take breaks, right? So the reason why I'm bringing that up is because as were there times for you as you were writing about your dad and the loss of your dad, how did you navigate through that time? And what are some of the things that you did to take care of yourself during that process?
That's a good question. Um, of course, writing it brought up, old memories, and I had to stop, you know, um, stop writing for a day and just process
Mm-hmm.
it, writing through the tears, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but it was definitely, after, the book was published, I would say it was definitely healing for me because I'm no longer afraid to talk about him. You know,
Mm-hmm.
I don't have to break down. Maybe I, shed a tear just a while ago, but I don't have to break down each time, I remember his name. I have pictures of him here and
Mm-hmm.
there. I'll go through it and look at it. I have pictures on my dresser of him and I. So, you know, that's how I kind of went through, writing the book. There were times that I had to pause, but then there were times I had to cry through it and just process it while writing it.
Mm-hmm.
And it was the part of me, so I know I needed to get all of that out.
Mm-hmm. You also spoke about therapy and that you went to therapy, right? What was what was the moment, if you recall the moment or the time that you said, mm, it's time, right? Because and one of the reasons why I asked that is because we know that therapy in the Black community is just like we've been we've been taught that therapy is not good, and if you go to therapy, you're not strong. We've been taught to handle problems on our own, to
Yeah.
carry our stuff, right? And we know that does not benefit us. It
Mm-hmm.
doesn't benefit us as individuals, and it doesn't benefit us as a community,
Right.
right? So even combating the stigma
Mm-hmm.
of attending therapy, right? What was that moment for you that was like, oh, okay, it's time. I have to go.
I have to talk to somebody.
Mm-hmm.
You know what? The moment, I think it was after I graduated from my undergrad, because I remember one of my professors saying that when you go into the field of social work, you're handling everybody's problems. Make sure you check yourself and check yours. Because as you hear people's stories, things are going to come up
Yeah.
to surface for you. And
Yeah.
then there's that kind of transference, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, at one point, I think at the point that I sought therapy is I felt like I was at a low point in my life. I was in a dark place. Um, yeah, on the outside, I was accomplishing, but my inner
Mm-hmm.
self wasn't, and I would find myself in tears all the time. Like literally, I was like, what is going on with me? I was very irritable. I isolated myself. And though I was functioning, but I wasn't at the same time. So at that point, I was like, you know what? I have insurance now, so let me go. What would it hurt
Mm-hmm.
to take care of myself? And at that time, I wasn't really saying, now everybody's saying self care, self care, self care,
Mm-hmm.
but at that point, I didn't see it as self care. I just saw it like I need help, and it takes acknowledging that, because I think sometimes we don't acknowledge things to ourselves. Other people may point out certain things like nah and brush it off and put it under the rug. But once you acknowledge, self-acknowledgement is important, because I think that's where the beginning of healing and actually, you really seeking help takes place. Because there's so many people suffering out there in silence. So many people, we hear it on the news all the time about, I don't mean to bring this up, but like suicide and,
No, please
it's on a
do bring it
high.
up. Mm-hmm.
It's on a high right now,
Yes, it is.
celebrities. We look at people having things all together. Money
Mm-hmm.
doesn't bring happiness. You know what I'm saying? And because you're suffering in silence, and maybe that person go to therapy, but I do definitely think it takes more than therapy. One of the factors is there has to be something higher that you have to hold on
Mm-hmm.
to get you through those dark places, because once you're at that dark place, it's hard to come out on your own. I know it. I've dealt with it, and there are times in my 40s that I've dealt with it too. But now I know when it's coming or when it's surfacing. I'm like, nope,
Mm-hmm. You're
I don't
able to
pray about
recognize the
it.
signs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
So thank you for mentioning that. And you guys, if you have any questions, feel free to drop it in the chat,
Mhm.
or even comments. Please feel free to drop it in the chat. So a lot of the things that you just shared in regards to being irritable, isolation, and as you mentioned,
Mhm.
suicide, right? Those are all signs of depression,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
Possible signs of depression. Particularly the isolation, like when we decide that we're going to isolate from others,
Mhm.
right, and kind of stay to ourselves. Of course, there's more signs, but those were two significant signs of depression.
Yeah.
So, did you recognize what you were dealing with? Did you recognize it as depression, or did you just say, "Hey, I need help"?
I think I did recognize it as depression, again, because I was in that sort of, you know, area with, social work and taking all these courses. And, I
Mm-hmm.
think I was early on in my career. So yeah, I definitely recognized it. I may have denied it, like, because we don't tell people that. That's like a taboo, right? We don't want to tell people that we dealt
Yep,
with depression.
that's the
Now I'm just saying, yeah,
dirty word.
I've dealt with depression. I've dealt with it, and there are sometimes that it may try to sneak up on me again, but I prayed away.
Mhm. Yes. Absolutely. Prayed away. And as you said before, you also recognize the signs. And
Mhm.
that's the wonderful thing about seeking support and having therapy,
Mhm.
right? And you're able to not only have the tools to combat the depression or the negative thoughts that you were having, but also you're able to recognize when it starts to come up again,
Yeah.
right? And it's like, okay, I remember this. I remember the last time I felt this. Okay.
Mhm.
And so you're able to then utilize the tools, and prayer is a tool,
Right.
right? So let's just be very clear.
Mhm.
Prayer is a
Mhm.
tool.
Mhm.
People don't know prayer
It
is a tool,
is.
right? So let's
Mhm.
say it again. Prayer is a
It's a
tool,
tool. Let's put
right?
in the comment. Prayer is
Prayer
a
is
tool.
prayer is a tool, right? So when they say about God, having a relationship with God and therapy go hand in
Definitely
hand. It's not
does.
one or the other,
Mhm.
right? But I just want to emphasize that. So as you were on this journey of going to therapy to deal with the loss, how is it, or how is it now for you when you experience loss in your life, right? Not so much particularly the loss of a loved one, right? Because
Mhm.
loss can be many different things.
Mhm.
We're just talking about one of them today and one type of trauma. How is it that it impacts you now that you were older and you have gone through the process of getting support for the loss of your dad? How does it impact you now?
I'm gonna talk twofold. So
Mhm.
it impacts me if I've lost many people, besides my dad. And I think as I got older, I recognize it as, it's a circle of life. Even
Mhm.
though we are going to have feelings of sadness and, that person is no longer there, you're going to grieve. everyone deals with grief differently.
Mm-hmm.
But now, as an adult, I think for me, just you go through that. You go through that loss. I'm also thinking about loss of, like, I no longer have certain relationship with friends. That's a loss.
Mm-hmm.
Because you build a relationship
Yeah.
with that person,
Yep.
friends, or even, like, relational lovers or whatever. You build a relationship with that person and they're no longer around, or y'all fell out or something. That's a loss.
That's
How
a
I deal
loss.
with
It is.
how I deal with is, I do, self, like, blame, like, what did I do? Did I do something wrong? Or look at myself, like, did I say something? I always look at myself
Mm-hmm.
first. I'm like, because
It's but
you never
so let me just ask you this. Is that self-blame?
probably
I I
probably
just want to know, what
probably
do you guys think? Do you think that's self-blame, or is it like, hey, let me just check me
uh-huh,
first, right?
uh-huh.
Like,
It could be a combination.
yeah, it can be,
Uh-huh.
and particularly if you are like continuously doing the same thing over and over, right? So
Right.
if you're kind of like, no, it had to be me. I had to do something, right? So that
Hmm.
it can probably go into self-blame,
Yeah.
but I think um like kind of checking yourself, like, okay, so let me think now. Did I
Yeah.
do something?
Uh-huh.
Right? Go ahead. I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
that's okay. So, as an adult, this is how I've dealt with it. I mean,
Hmm.
you know, um, loss of any kind is going, whether it's death, whether it's a place, people lose their homes all the time,
Yeah.
whether it's something that we are connected to. And once that connection is pulled away from us, so many emotions are going to come up for us,
Hmm.
and everyone, as I said, everyone deals with those things differently. I think the
Hmm.
key is having an outlet. That's the word. Having an outlet, whether it be therapy or supportive relationships that you still have.
Hmm.
Hold on to those things, because those are the things, and your faith. Those are the things that are going to help you through that.
Yeah. Um, how does that, how is your view on abandonment? I was trying to think about how to phrase that, because I know that was one of the things that really you said came up for you, right? The feelings of abandonment. So how are you able to kind of decipher, um, like, people coming in or exiting your life in regards to abandonment? Because you experienced that at such a young
As
age,
a
right?
child,
Yeah.
I think now I don't. I mean, mhm. It depends what age I'm talking about, because, as I said earlier, that little girl and that little boy follows you. That
Yeah.
little girl, Kimmy, that my dad used to call me, is always going to feel that sense of abandonment. As again, his death wasn't on purpose, but as a child, when you lose someone so significant, you feel abandoned. And then you
Mm-hmm.
have all this anxiety that your parent, the second parent, the mom or dad or whatever, is going to leave you. So that, I
Mm-hmm.
feel that's always going to be there. I don't know if that will ever be erased from me.
Mm-hmm.
It's a part of me. But as an
Mm-hmm.
adult in my 40s, I
Mm-hmm.
have the tools to help to deal with those things, whether I lose a friendship or whatever. It hurts.
Mm-hmm.
We're human beings. We're gonna hurt. We
Mm-hmm.
can't deny that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so
Yeah, definitely. And thank you for even saying that, because I think people, even past getting through the stigma of therapy, right? I think people have this perception of therapy, like, it's, you go there and it's just like all of these thoughts, and they're going to disappear, and it's
yeah.
going to be like, and it's not that, right? It's
It's
definitely
not a
not that.
cure, but it's a
It's no.
tool that you use to help you through. And
Yeah.
sometimes even the therapist, I have one therapist say, it's like, okay, like, you seem like you're using your tools. And no, actually, no, it was the other way around. I said, I don't need therapy no more. I was like, I'm good. Because at that point, I started going back to church. I
Mm-hmm.
started getting closer to God. So I had that tool. So when
Mm-hmm.
once we don't have that therapy as a tool anymore, you have to find another productive and healthy tool. Whether it's your relationship with God, whether it's close foundations of friends, to support you through it. Yeah.
Definitely. So therapy is not a cure-all, right? It's used in many other of your other tools, right? We talked about, our relationship with God is a tool, our prayer is a tool, and therapy is a tool as well. And it's not you're going to go to therapy and they're going to solve all your problems and you won't have these feelings anymore. It is about getting the tools that you need. And for this particular, with grief and loss, to be able to process the grief, right? To process the loss. And a lot of times we think that things has happened so many years ago, and we don't understand why it's still impacting us. And a lot of times it's still impacting us because we have not dealt with it, right? And so it just follows us.
Yeah.
It follows us through our relationships. It shows up in our everyday life, and we don't even realize it until it's like something kind of hits you and say, okay, what's going on with me? And it's usually something that kind of affects your everyday functioning, and it makes you realize I'm not myself and something is wrong, right?
It's a journey, Sorry, it's a journey. Definitely a journey, loss as, I have had adult friends that have lost a parent, and I can relate with them. But also, sometimes I admire their situation because they were adults losing their parent, not kids. So I don't know if it's still a loss, but I'm like, wow, you got this opportunity to spend so much time with your mom or your dad. I didn't, but I understand. You empathize. I understand how you feel. You feel, because I always tell families this, like adult children that are losing a parent in their older age, like your 80s, 90s, you really return to be a child at that point. Even though you're a caregiver, it's like, mommy, daddy, I'm losing my mom and my dad. You literally become a little person. That's why I say your little person is always following you. So you have to give that little person grace. You have to love that little person because it's always going to follow you. That little girl, little boy is always going to follow you.
Okay. So I don't see anything in the chat. So I'm going to
Y'all
ask.
Y'all don't got no questions?
Yeah.
Y'all feel like, I know this is a very sensitive subject. As we said, a lot of people don't want to talk about grief and loss, but we have to. At the end of the day, we as people have to.
Definitely. It's so needed, and I know it's very difficult, right? And so once again, I just want to thank you, Kimberly, for just being vulnerable and sharing. And so if you guys have questions, please put it in the chat. One of the things that I know some people may have questions about is, how do we talk to kids about grief and loss, right?
Sorry.
And okay. Kimberly's going to put her website in there.
Yeah. No, go on. I'll wait till the end. I'm sorry. I was trying to put it in.
No, go ahead. That's fine. So you can put that in there. So if you want more tools in regards to talking to your child about grief and loss, and one of the things that we talked about was using concrete terms, and like, for example, not sleeping or went away. Those terms are not concrete terms in helping kids understand of the loss of their loved one. I know, and I'm just going to say a little bit of what I do as a counselor when I talk to kids about loss. I usually have some kind of tool to support the conversation. Sometimes you can get a kid-friendly book. There's so many out there on dealing with grief and loss.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Let me just stop you. It's a little funny, not a funny joke, but I had a patient that was passing away. Their great-grandchild was 3. And they were asking me, how do we have a conversation with this young child? So I sent them Sesame Streets have some really good videos and books. So I sent them, and she said, such and such is afraid of Elmo. So they couldn't, they didn't even, well, that's why you have to kind of see what kind of things the kids like. Because there, as you said, there's a lot of books out there
Yeah.
that can cater to their likings, you know? So I just thought that, I was like, oh, I felt so embarrassed. I was like, I'm so sorry. I thought everybody loved Elmo, but he did not.
Yeah, he did not. It reminded me like when I was younger, I was when you would go to the theme parks like
Oh,
Disney and you had the big cartoon
yeah.
characters. I used to be afraid of them when I was younger. It was
Mhm.
scary for me.
Yeah.
So I could definitely relate to the 3-year
Mhm.
old in
Mhm.
regards to that. But there's just so many different books in regards to helping children through grief and loss. I know one of the books that I use is called When Someone Very Special Dies, right?
Yeah,
And
I've heard of that.
it gives you a whole, it's like a picture book and you can
Yeah.
draw. It gives you the whole understanding of what happens when someone
Mhm.
dies
Mhm.
and they don't come back. They can't laugh and play with you. They can't
Mhm.
breathe
Mhm.
anymore. So those are like the concrete things that we're talking
Right.
about when you talk to children about grief and loss.
Yeah.
We also talk about that, when there's a funeral, that's our way to say goodbye to
Yeah.
our loved one.
And
Um, and
so many parents don't want to bring their children to say goodbye because they're still
why you
trying to,
to
still trying,
me?
so,
Go
because
ahead.
they're trying to protect them. But in
Yes.
actuality, you're not protecting them. You're stopping them from grieving.
Yeah.
So, especially when that person holds a significant role in their lives, you have to allow them to say goodbye. Even when I mean, I don't know what our timing, but even when I have
Good.
young patients like in their
Mm-hmm.
30s or 40s that have young kids, I tell them, bring that your child into the room, let them interact with that mom or dad, because this is what they're going to hold on to.
Mm-hmm.
um Write in letters, age appropriate, depending, drawing pictures. They, younger kids like drawing pictures,
Yep.
just to help them rephrase their memory. Write in letters.
Mm-hmm.
um Even even I had a long time ago, there's like a memory box that, I don't know if you ever heard of.
Mm-hmm.
I thought
Yes.
about doing one. I was like,
Absolutely.
you know what, I need, not to be morbid, but I
Mm-hmm.
was like, I just need to put something aside so my son Isaiah Liam Brown
Mm-hmm.
can have, because those are the things, intricates of important. I have a chain for my grandmother since she gave me when I was 13, and I
Yeah.
never ever, gave that away or threw it. You know what I'm saying? I held on to that because that reminds me of her. So
Definitely.
that's important.
All of those
Uh-huh.
things. So like you said, writing.
Right.
Sometimes you want to write a
Mhm.
letter. Sometimes kids will write a goodbye letter, depending on
Yeah.
the age. Like you said, drawing a picture.
Hmm.
Sometimes I would ask the kids that I'm interacting with to, oh, really? I'm so sorry to hear about your grandma, grandpa dying.
Yeah.
Tell me about them, and
Yeah.
just let them talk.
Hmm.
Right?
Hmm.
Let them just share all the memories and all the good
Hmm.
things that they can think of, and we have a conversation of, a funeral is a time for us to say
Yeah.
goodbye, right? So if mom or dad allows you to go, right? Because we don't have control over that,
Yeah.
right? But please, if we are to encourage you, please let that child go to that funeral to say
Hmm.
goodbye to their loved one, and it brings closure, right? It's
Definitely.
saying goodbye, and
Absolutely.
it brings closure, and it gives them
Hmm.
a better
Hmm.
understanding. So all these things are important, and depending on the child, we may talk about what the casket is, and
Yeah.
to burial site, what are all of those things are.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
if you need further resources, you can reach out to me
Hmm.
um, on Instagram, on Facebook. You can even drop in the chat, even when this live is over. If you need further resources, I will be definitely happy to assist you. Um, yeah, so Kimberly, as we come to a close, thank you so much.
Hmm.
I do have one last question for you. Um, with not only just the loss of your dad, but the other losses that you have experienced, how is it for you working with hospice? Because that's one of the first things that you mentioned, right? So how does that, is that
It's
like a
ironic, right?
constant?
It's like an
Yeah, it's
oxymoron. Like,
very
how did
ironic.
you end up?
Yeah.
And I actually had one of my first therapists ask me that because when I first started hospice, I was in Florida. I was living in
Mhm.
Florida at that time. When I came back, I went back to the same therapist. She was like, how did you end up there? Like, you still have issues. Like, not, she didn't say it like that, but you still have a hard time talking about,
Process.
your loss of. But I look at it as, I look at working in that field as a calling because it actually helped me as an adult to deal with.
Mhm.
I think that's when it really started surfacing, really started to like present itself like, oh wow, like I lost my dad too. I know how this person is
Mhm.
feeling. Helped me to relate to people a lot,
Mhm.
especially with young parents with kids. I'm so sensitive to that because I'm like, I know you don't speak to them about it. This is what's going to happen, to them
Mhm.
when they're older.
Mhm.
So, hospice for me is a call, and it's not something that I take lightly. I've been doing it for a very long time, but it's also an opportunity to support families and patients throughout that end of life phase.
Mhm. So I'm assuming that there are times that you are triggered,
Oh,
right?
yes. Especially when I develop a close relationship with that patient and family. Sometimes we
Mhm.
get patients towards the very, very end, but then sometimes you're able to build that relationship with that family and the patient.
Mhm.
So I think I've had cases, especially the younger, like my
Yeah.
age, younger,
Yeah.
that's when it hits me.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I could go through my day to day, but we do definitely need an outlet, and I'm so grateful that I have that right now,
Mhm.
because I don't know if I'll be able to do it without, my faith at the end of the day,
Mhm.
you know.
Mhm. So I know one of the things that we talked about earlier is that prayer is definitely a tool,
Mm-hmm.
right? And having a walk with God, a daily walk with God. What are some of the other tools that you utilize when you are supporting families in hospice care? Because of course there's going to be certain situations that are going to touch home for you. So what are some of the things that you do in regards to kind of navigating through that space
For my
and taking care of
for
yourself?
myself,
Yes.
um, other things, I'm a traveler. I love
Mm-hmm.
traveling. And definitely taking time off because we cannot do this work. Sometimes I have to take a mental health day because it gets a lot. Sometimes if I find myself seeing 4 people and I know I'm going to deal with like a really hard case, I'll see less because I know I need to take care of myself. So I'm more aware of what triggers me, or I feel like, and I also related, like at the end of the day, I'm emotionally drained. Sometimes I don't feel like talking to anybody. So music is a therapy for me. On my way home, I'm listening to music so I get to process it. We do have, meetings, so we get to sometimes process some of the losses. Not as we should, but,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
um, but definitely, and I think that's another reason why I had went to therapy during that time, because I realized that the work that I do is heavy. When
Yeah,
I tell people what
definitely.
I do, like, how do you do that? That's
Yep.
depressing, and I have to
Mm-hmm.
explain to them that this is what I'm supposed to be doing.
Mm-hmm.
So, for now, and I'm doing
For now.
other things, I'm writing, but this is my
Yeah.
nine, my 9 to 5.
Thank you so much, Kimberly, for joining us about and just sharing your story in regards to this very sensitive conversation. Um, so Kimberly put her website in the
Yes,
chat. Where can people follow you? I know you're on Instagram.
yes. I'm working on reinventing my Facebook, so I don't have my Facebook is deactivated, so I have to
Okay.
do another one. But Instagram is my main, and my website is my main
Okay.
source of contact. Mm-hmm.
All right. So, guys, as we close, if there's no other comments or questions, know that you can see this live. If you just kind of caught a little bit of it, you can see this on my page, and you can also see this on Kimberly's page. I do have a YouTube channel. It will be available there. Just look for Dealing with Grief and Loss. and with special guests, and you'll see Kimberly's name there, and you can watch the whole
Thank you.
conversation. Again, I want to emphasize that if you do have questions in regards to talking to children regarding grief or loss, or even if you just need a referral, you can reach out to me. I do have referrals on my website as well, sayabehagan.com. So thank you for
Thank
joining us this
you.
evening, Kimberly. Thank you
Thank you
so much.
so
I so
much for this
appreciate you.
platform. Thank you for always making me feel comfortable.
Absolutely.
You know, I appreciate it. Thank you for this safe space to talk about, healing through whatever, trauma on a whole, because so many people deal with different
Yeah.
types. But thank you for this platform, because I think, again, it's so much needed. So much needed.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you,
Thank
everyone
you.
who chimed in and, take a break because this was heavy,
Yes, it was.
Thank you.
All
Take
right. Have
care.
a good evening,
All right.
everyone. Have a good evening,
Take
Kimberly. Bye bye.
care.